Take a closer look at whether Nigel Wright's testimony helped or hurt Mike Duffy's case. We're joined from Vancouver by criminal lawyer Mike Preston. Welcome to the show again. Mike, I'm asking you, what do you think Nigel Wright's contribution was as a Crown witness who's supposedly trying to help the Crown get this conviction? Did he help with anything on that?
Don, what I would view the prosecution's tactics here is that they reluctantly had to put Mr. Wright in the stand for this trial. And the reason they had to do that is you can't prove bribery unless you get some evidence about who provided the money and why they provided the money. So that forces the Crown, if they are going to actually make out their case, to call this witness. Having said that, they knew probably all along that it was going to end up being a bit of a political circus. And it sounds like they held their tongue up until about this morning when they just couldn't take it anymore, and they stood up and vented their frustration that this is no longer a legal trial, it's more of a political circus.
Does it matter in terms of the legalities of what's going on here, whether Ray Novak knew about the $90,000 offer to settle Mike Duffy's repayment expenses? Is that relevant at all to the criminal charges that Duffy's facing?
Well, that's exactly the point, is that it's actually not relevant to whether or not Mike Duffy is guilty of a bribery conviction or not. That's what some of the frustration has been about this. This is why politics have continued to trump the legal analysis. And standing back and looking forward at this is actually a bit funny, because there's almost like there's two different trials going on at the same time. So on the one hand, you have Mr. Bain cross-examining Nigel Wright in the courtroom, and then reporters take that material and they use it to cross-examine Mr. Harper on the campaign trail, effectively turning it into Mr. Harper's campaign trial.
The bottom line here, though, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Nigel Wright was there primarily to deal with the alleged bribery of Senator Mike Duffy, not all these other expense claims. He was there on the bribery charge. And I'm still trying to get my head around the fact that I don't hear a lot of the Crown saying Mike Duffy demanded this payment to make himself less visible and less of a problem. That it seemed to be more tilted the other way. Please take this repayment. Go quietly into the night. Don't keep raising a ruckus here. Is there still a danger to Mike Duffy that he could be found guilty of that bribery charge, given what we heard from from Nigel Wright?
There's certainly still a danger that he could be found guilty of the bribery charge. And just to be clear, in order to be found guilty of the bribery, there's no need to show that it was at Mr. Duffy's initiative himself. Simply accepting that is enough to be convicted. Now, a lot of hay has been made about this idea that Mr. Duffy reluctantly went along with it, or initially he wasn't interested in taking this bribe, but eventually he did. And so the only way he's going to be able to get around that, if in fact it's found to be a bribe, is to try and put together some sort of duress defense. But the elements haven't been made out. If you'd been in the courtroom today, you would have seen that during the Crown's redirect questioning, they asked, was at any point Mr. Duffy threatened that if he didn't take the check, there would be some sort of harm to come? And of course, Nigel Wright says, no, nothing like that happened. And the reason the Crown was cutting off that avenue is that they still want to have their bribery charge stand, and they don't want Mr. Bain to be able to stand up and make out the defense of duress. In other words, the defense that I was forced to do it. But the fact of the matter is, no gun was put to Mr. Duffy's head, and he hasn't alleged yet that they threatened his family or anything like that. So really, there is no threat, there is no forcing. Mr. Duffy took that money. The only question is, was it in fact a bribe? Did he do it in his official capacity as a senator?
What should Duffy's lawyers' approach be to the Prime Minister's former top legal advisor, Ben Perrin, who's up next? What do you think that's going to do to advance the trial?
Well, again, this is going to be very similar to what we've seen with Nigel Wright. Mr. Perrin is likely being called by the Crown because he did have some peripheral involvement in the decision to pay Mr. Duffy and the actual handing off and where those funds came from. So the Crown are going to call him for those elements. But again, Mr. Bain is going to spend a lot of his time taking out that information from Mr. Perrin that has to do with making out that Mr. Duffy didn't initially want to go along with it, that Mr. Duffy didn't believe that he had to repay those expenses, and it was only forced to do so under the immense pressure of powerful people.
Right. Okay. Interesting stuff. Mike Preston, thanks again. Appreciate joining us.